Hello everyone. It is a video which is to be presented to Nainital HRDC on part of refresher program on academic research writing. I would like to take a topic of hypothesis in research. Now let us first understand what is hypothesis. Now hypothesis is a statement or an assumption between the relationship of two or more variables which has to be tested. So it can be a statement or an assumption between two or more variables, and that has to be tested. Now this is called as hypothesis. Now how do we derive at hypothesis or a statement or an assumption? Now, to derive this statement or assumption, we need to look at literature review. A literature review is required, or observation is required, or based on experience, we can have a statement or we can have an assumption which we can trust it in our research. Now that is called as hypothesis. So any assumption or statement that can be testable is called as hypothesis. So let us look at some of the features of hypothesis. So when we have an assumption or statement, that has to be very clear and precise. We cannot have a confused statement, or we cannot have a universal truth which is acting as a statement. For example, universal truth can be sun rises on east. Now we can't test it. It's being proved that sun rises on east, and that is not a hypothesis because it's a universal truth. So when we have an hypothesis, that has to be very clear and precise. Second is, it has to be very very specific. So in our research we know the scope of research. So in our research we need to understand what exactly is our hypothesis, and now that is derived from our objectives. So we need to have a clear objectives, and from objectives we can identify our hypothesis. Then it has to be testable. So we have to test it by using statistical test, and this is called as hypothesis, and some of the features of hypothesis. Now let us look at some of the examples related to hypothesis. For example, a consumption of sugar leads to obesity. Now that can be an hypothesis which has to be tested. Now for this we have to look at respondents, we have to have a sampling process, and that sample should be perfect sample. There should not be sampling error and all that. So we need to take that sample, and then we need to take their statements, and then we need to test their sugar, and then we need to test their weights and all that, and then we have to compare it. Now that can be one hypothesis, and by using statistical test we can test that statement whether it is right or wrong. So we can say that it's null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. Now what is null hypothesis? Is a statement which has an effect, which has no effect or no difference or no relationship between variables, is called as null hypothesis. And there is another hypothesis that's called as alternative hypothesis. That is a statement or an assumption which has an effect or difference or relationship between variables. Now that is called as hypothesis, null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis. So another example can be related to agriculture productivity. Now there is availability of agriculture credit, that is finance or loans. Now that we can test whether it has increased the productivity of farmers or agriculture. Now that can be one hypothesis. So like this, there is null hypothesis and alternative hypothesis, and this will give us an idea with regard to where is our research, how we have to carry on with it. Now this is all about hypothesis. Thank you so much.